humbly seek their knowledge and wisdom, because that's where all good things happen, is in the imagination of the little guys. Well, I was told here, we're in Prescott, Arizona right now, and just a mile or two away from here is Yavapai College. And I built a replica of the spaceships. I came out here to build a replica of the spaceship underground. And I designed and built it the same way we built the craft, being very careful to follow natural law. And people that got wind of it came and were very impressed, and they had people coming out filming it and so forth, and they asked me to speak at Yavapai College and how I could build a magnificent habitat that was running totally on free and abundant energy for $5,000, that was appraised and valued in those days at $165,000. So they asked me to speak, and I did. And that a very grainy video still exists. It's somewhere in the archives of the whole episode and the house. But while I was at Yavapai College, a professor had, this was when the Freedom of Information Act was in progress, and he gave a lecture there, and I happened to be in the lecture hall when he was going on about all these things that are happening that we knew nothing about. Now they're known as black ops, but in those days we didn't really have a label for a lot of them. We just felt that they were using taxpayers' monies and not letting the people know where the money was going and so forth. But he said one of the things that he noticed, and he didn't even know I was in the audience, but he was mentioning that he was in Los Alamos, New Mexico, and he'd gone down 9 levels underground, 9 elevators or whatever down underground, and noticed that there were bays filled with different, very unusually built devices that looked like it was from out of the future. And one of them that he saw was the OTCX-1, the 45-foot craft that was confiscated. And the orders of the guides, or the guardians of the place, were ordered not to talk to any of the observers. But he happened to make friends with one of the guardians or guards, and he said that they had tried to mount weapons on them, and using a pure magnetic field, weapons are obsolete, they can't be used. So what happened, there was a lot of very tragic and severe accidents because everything they tried would blow up on them, and they had to abandon the idea. They were going to use them as scout vehicles and so forth. So I was happy to know that of the location, and I was happy to know that that they weren't going to be able to use it, because those machines, the ones we were building, was for humanity, and you had to have the spirit of love and respect, or they wouldn't operate. I had just got done with I'd spent some time at the UC Davis, University of California at Davis, with a Professor Moeller, who was designing and building on government grants vehicles that were supposed to be levitational eventually, and they were shaped like a circular foil craft, but they had 8 small combustion engines around the periphery, and they'd fire them up, and it would levitate, and the noise was so bad I couldn't even stand it. I couldn't be in the. But I had talked to Moeller and said, that what about if we considered another source for the power, like magnetism? And he rather abruptly told me, no, this is government funded. This is what they want me to do. This is kind of a showtime for the public to see, we're working on this. Then I said, well, you expect to ever succeed? He says, not at this rate. We're never going to get more than 100 feet off the ground. So I said, well, okay, thank you. And now he's building floating cars that get off maybe 10 or 15 feet off the ground. But the amount of money he was being paid on government grants to just make a show that we're working on it, was tremendous. I mean, there's hundreds of thousands of dollars for naught. It wasn't going productively anywhere. Yeah, well, this was the intent. Um, I wanted to become isolated far enough away from the mainstream so that I wouldn't be bothered or looky-loos and so forth, because some of the things that we were experimenting with did have things to do with light and vibrations and some sounds and so forth. So we felt our way over to Prescott, Arizona, and actually about 18 miles north of Prescott is a place called Chino Valley, and we found a very remote piece of land, and we had to have the land invite us because this is part of sacred geometry. You have to be at the right place. You have to start it with a solid foundation or it won't work. The land invited us through a whole series of very beautiful coincidences. We got the land, and the idea was to build an underground house, and from the levitation point, if we could. But the minute we even thought about levitation, the planning and zoning said, there's no such thing. You're going to have to anchor this and so forth. So we didn't go any further with that idea. We said, okay. So we did build the craft, the replica. It's still there to this day. We were over there just the other day. I think you were with us. It's still intact. It's still functional. It's been remodeled, but we started, once we got it built to a point where I could put up a workbench, I started building small experimental models that I wanted to. We had 12 acres, 12 and a half acres, and I had a meadow down below, and I wanted to levitate these craft around so that just for tests to see if we could do it. Well, I didn't have enough of the knowledge. I didn't have enough of what I was doing, so it was taking me quite a bit of time. But we attracted from the neighbors, of our activity, because we were lighting up the whole place, and we had no wires, no telephone poles. We had plenty of water. We were using air wells for water. We were using ham radios for telephones, and solar panels, and we had television, we had small computer, Timex Sinclair, 16 kBs, but that's what it was in those days. But everything was running, and we lit up the whole top of the mountain, and our neighbors were using candle lights and lanterns and flashlights, and so we became a very curious thing to them. So they had people coming out, they would report them to somebody, and they would come out and kind of see, what are you up to here and so forth. Are you following the codes and the rules? And because our septic system that we put in, I didn't want to go with that. I had got plans from Sweden of a recyclable system that was completely pure and reusable. The methane gas and everything could be used. And I went to the planning and zoning, and they said, forget it. You've got to dig a whole septic system, put a leach line. I had to adhere to something I didn't want to, but we became apprehensive because they were then starting to fly. See, I was being watched ever since I left Carr. They said, we're going to be monitoring you forever, and you're not to ever try this again or get together with anybody and so forth. So then when we started noticing these black helicopters with no markings on them, and they'd come right over with big cameras, and I could see the guy with the cameras just filming our land and trying to film what was inside the underground house. We felt this isn't going to work because they're going to come in and take our land away or whatever. So we put it into prayer, if you will, and just turned it over to natural law that what the next step would come to us. We didn't even try to plan anything. And a gentleman by the name of Walter Baumgartner, who wrote the magazines Energy, what is the name of that? Energy Unlimited, I believe is the name of the magazine. He wrote volumes after volumes of the type of work we were doing, and he even had Tesla's work in there. But he came over and said, I'd heard about you, and I don't really know how he heard about us because we were trying to keep things kind of quiet. And I said, well, we're having difficulty here because we've been kind of spotted, and we've been told, if we, and he says, well, don't worry about that. I've got a place in Magdalena, New Mexico, totally, it's on an Indian reservation, totally isolated, and I've got all the facilities, the machine shop, tool and die to help you. Will you work with me? And I said, sure. So we gave him everything we had so that if anybody came in of any ideas of, finding something that they could, cause a problem for us, we gave it to Walter. He took him back over to New Mexico, and then very delightfully, we were then commuting back and forth to New Mexico, and he was building small replicas and larger replicas over there. I do still have some of those plans and things somewhere. But he got so far, and the unusual thing that most people don't understand, this isn't a conventional nuts and bolts linear craft. It's not like anything. Not like an automobile. You can't put in a key, turn it on, and run it like an automobile. It's run by consciousness. It's run by synergizing with the craft itself. And when you're working with it, you have to be very, very humble and close to nature, because every detail has to be honored for what it is. And he built it, and he was successful in levitating it off his platform in inches, and it took him a tremendous amount of work to get it that far. And he became very, very frustrated and kept coming back and forth, and we kept going over, and I said, you really have to have the spirit. You really have to love this. Has to be alive. Everything, when you understand it, is energy, but energy is live. It's all alive consciousness. And in order to effectively get off the ground with this type of a device, you have to get very, very close to the consciousness of what you're working with. You have to love every part and love the way it sets and feel how it sets. And if it doesn't feel right, tear it up and start over. Because it won't work unless you feel your way through it. You think your way through it, you'll never get anywhere, because the thought is very limited. It just doesn't care much about anything outside of its jurisdiction, which is a third-dimensional reality, third-dimensional body. Anything foreign to that is a threat. So it ignores or sets up a defense, or even becomes very aggressive to anything outside of its jurisdiction. So, and he had those blocks that he couldn't get out of the way and allow his spirit, the spirit of loving what he was doing, even though he was an engineer and even though he enjoyed the challenge. He eventually, we lost contact because we had to do some other things. And eventually, he had to cease his operation. And I don't know, I never talked to him in the final days or whatever. So, and I heard he's gone to Canada. He went to Canada and was trying to effect building them in Canada with somebody, but that's the last I'd ever heard of. Oh well, that was abandoned at one time. I mean, we were, a lot of these, I don't know, some of them anyway, are earlier drawings, and some of the later drawings aren't even here. But the accumulator, once aligned with the natural flows of energy, the magnetic fields of energy that are flowing all around us, uh, accumulated electricity, if you will, or energy, not really electricity till it accumulated it, and then distributed it, opposed to a generator which generates electricity. And this is what we live in now, generated electricity, which is sold through telephone poles and wires, and eventually a meter, and become very, very expensive, causing a displacement of sometimes 78 to 80% of a person's income just to support the energy bills. So we wanted to replace them with this simple Utron, which is an accumulator. And once put in the craft, this is an RV in the sky. You can take off, and you can stay a few inches or a few miles above the surface. You can never have an accident because in magnetic fields, you're accident free. There's no noise, there's no pollution, there's no G-forces to experience. It's a different mousetrap. It's completely different. Yeah, aerials are essential. And when we were experimenting, we had to have the ground